guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we are looking at some fall products from the Hello Harvest release. This is what is it? Forever? I can't remember. Forever Grateful. That's what it is. And then I'm doing the Lovely Layers Gallery Wall, and the stamps are the Fall Gallery Wall. And so we're going to be doing like a bunch of mini watercolors. That's the best way I can think to describe them. So I am going to, instead of stamping them and framing them like you would use the gallery wall, I'm going to use them to kind of make my own pattern paper and help me get some watercolor practice. For some reason, I don't know, for fall, like I always think of watercolor for fall. If you go back and look like in my history of videos, it always seems like fall is when the watercolor comes out. And so in order to get that little bit of practice for the no line watercolor, I am going to be stamping these in our no line ink. I also want to mention I am using my Misty, but I have taken out the foam bottom because of the cling stamps. They already have the foam built in, so I don't need that foam piece. And I am stamping on watercolor paper. This is Canson Monteval watercolor paper. It is a cold press that I prefer cold press to hot press. Hot press is typically for more detailed, but I am not upset with the amount of detail that I get with cold press. But you use whatever your preferred watercolor paper is. So I do like to have a little bit of a bolder line because I guess maybe it helps me be more confident in where I'm going with my watercolor. So I do stamp mine twice, and you'll see there's like this big gaping hole in the middle. I'm not overly worried about that because I am going to put my sentiment in a frame, but I am going to kind of fill in some of my edges so that it feels like maybe the paper kind of continues on, and it's not just this one, little sheet. So I'm stamping some edges just to make sure that it looks like it continues on. And honestly, after this was done, I trimmed it down even more so that I could have a border. Your girl loves a frame. I love a frame. I can't stop it. And so really some of these, like we won't end up seeing. I'm going to be using my Altenew watercolor paints. They are tubes. I've put them in pans myself. So I'm going to be using those, and then also some metallic paints. You don't necessarily need metallic paints to do the gold highlight that we're going to do at the end. You could use Perfect Pearls. You can also use Spellbinders has like a little watercolor mixing set that is just gold, silver, and black. You could use that as well. Or if you have another brand of metallics, that will also work. So here what you see me doing is some color mixing. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So I want a brown but I want like a little bit of a warmer brown. So I mixed my magenta with its complement, which is green, like a yellow green. So I used olive, and then to make it a little bit warmer, I added in some yellow. I believe the yellow I used was permanent yellow deep. I'm gonna look. You're gonna hear it rattle around. I apologize. I should have left that little piece out of my watercolor set so I would know what color it was. It is permanent yellow deep. So that's how I mixed my browns, but you could do any two complementary colors and get a brown color. So, you could mix equal parts of red and green, equal parts of purple and yellow. So I just chose the pink and the green because honestly, that's what I had on my palette from a different card. So I just went with what I already had. So I'm using this to do the stems on my pumpkins and also the basket. I like a more controlled watercolor. Not everybody does, and that's totally okay. I like it to be a bit more controlled. So typically I put down my watercolor and then I use clean water to kind of draw it out. And then I also can go back in while it's still wet and drop in more color so that way I don't... The way you're supposed to properly do it is to work in layers, okay? And you layer and layer and layer, and that's how you get those deeper colors. I am far too impatient for that. So you should do it in layers. If you don't want to do it in layers, you can do it this way. So basically, I just kind of outline what it is that I put down my darkest color. You're also not supposed to work on two areas that are next to each other. This is true. You should not do that. And for most of the time, I try to avoid it so that there is separation. With this particular type of watercolor, I am using such little water because less water is more control and more water is less control. Because I'm using so little water, they are drying pretty quickly. That's why you can kind of see me working on this whole basket. It's because the bottom is already dry. I did also speed this up. I should just, to be honest. So I can go in and drop in the color and then let it dry a little bit, drop in some more color, and so on and so forth. You could also do the layers. For the basket, I kind of did just all the same color, including the handle. And that's also what I'm going to use for like the little corks in this top. Like there's a bottle and a pitcher, those corks, and then on the right hand side there is like an old kind of like jam jar style, which I think traditionally you would see more as a plaid. I decided to do mine more as like a burlap so I could just continue that brown on. But I'm breaking all kinds of rules here with my watercolor. Like when we're teaching something, you're supposed to teach it the right way to do it. But sometimes, like when you're in a rush or you're feeling impatient or you just are kind of lost in thought and doing your own thing, which is really kind of what happened to me here. It's okay. If you know what is going on and you understand the watercolor well enough to know what is happening, once you have that good understanding, then you can break the rules. You don't have to follow every single rule. For the pumpkins, like I wanted them to be sectioned out. So I followed the rule of not doing two things that touched each other. For the tree up in the top right corner, I didn't. I did all of it while it was still wet from the first go round, and I just dropped color in, waited for it to dry, dropped some more color in. So when you have a good understanding of the way that things will work, you can totally break the rules and it's okay. Also, it helps to know what kind of results you want. If you want more controlled results, then you want to use less water. If you want a looser style of painting, this is not a good example of that, by the way. Nothing about this style of painting is loose. Everything about what I'm doing today is super controlled. But also, that's where I'm most comfortable. Like, I love a loose watercolor, the way that it looks. I think it's beautiful and it's stunning. Most of the time when other people do it, honestly, not necessarily when I am doing it. And even though this is super controlled, there are still parts of this painting that I don't love, where it kind of got away from me. But we're practicing with each new time that we are watercoloring. We are getting practice to help us understand how it's going to work, and doing X is going to give us Y results, or doing A is going to give us B results. So for the leaves, because I wanted the leaves to kind of meld into different colors, of course I'm going to do those all at one time. That is an example of like letting it be a little bit looser, where I put water down and then I dropped color into it, versus being very controlled, putting the color down and then kind of pulling it out with clean water in, where I want it to go. So I guess this is kind of more of a combination. Because I use such a little amount of water, they do dry really fast. So the process really doesn't take any longer. Here you can totally see I mixed my orange, and then I added a little bit. See, I just put a little bit of blue in it. If you want a less saturated version of the color that you already have, like the orange in here is, Oh, I can't remember what it is. Anyway, it's very bright. The orange is very bright. But I wanted it to be more of a fall orange. So I just added just a little bit of the blue. I think it was Prussian blue that I dropped in there. But just adding that little bit of blue because it's its complementary color, it knocks back the orange so that it is not so bright and in your face. I would recommend probably mixing more than you think that you're going to need. That is my biggest downfall. I never mix enough and then I have to remix and then the colors aren't the same, which you'll clearly be able to see in my pumpkins. But I don't know, maybe that's what adds to adds to kind of like the whimsy of it. Doing, the colors aren't exactly perfect. The painting isn't exactly perfect. Doing the mix of more controlled versus, dropping the color in. For this gourd in particular, I knew that I wanted to do it like green and then add some stripes into it. So I said nothing about this painting is loose, but that's not true. That was a lie. Because I honestly, I didn't think about that being a looser way of watercoloring, but definitely the way we're doing the leaves is a looser way of watercoloring. For no line coloring, you do want to make sure that you are keeping your edges. So when you first go in, you want to make sure that you're defining your edges. So don't add so much water that it totally bleaches out your lines. For this little leaf, I just did green and a little bit of yellow. But so you want to maintain those borders so that it doesn't end up looking just like a giant blob. So that's why when we do the pumpkins, we do each segment individually, because if we did them all the same, we would not keep the lines and then it would not look like a pumpkin. Same thing here for this little grapes. I'm doing the magenta and the violet and mixing them together. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use that same color repeated in the little jar after I do the blue. So I just used a very little bit of the dark cyan to the color of the glass. I mean, they're not really blue, but I don't know, even like last night when I put my daughter in the bathtub, she was like, why is the water blue? And I was like, it's not, it just looks that way. It's the way that the light reflects and all these things, and I can't explain it, but it looks blue. So the glasses look blue, even though they're not. So in order for them to have a little bit of shading, I use the cyan. But back to the grapes, like here, I dropped in, color into a couple of little circles, and then I'm going to let those dry before I go in and do the next round of circles. And I'm going to do the grapes in the basket the same way. If I had to do it all over again, I kind of wish I would have swapped one of the grapes with one of the pumpkins, because I have 2 orange pumpkins on the right hand side and then I ended up with 2 grapes on the left hand side. It is what it is. It all, came together in the end. But I probably would have flip-flopped those 2. Anywho, so I showing you the majority of the painting. Here I'm going back in and I'm using a little bit of darker green to add back in those details into the gourd, into the leaf. I'm going to use a little bit of the brown mixed with the orange to do the details for the pumpkin, whether it's going to be, this one's like quite spotted, to do the spots on there, or to add in, some striations on the other pumpkin to help give it a little bit more shape. There's things that you can do, to go back in and add those details. This is one style of card that shockingly I don't use a white gel pen on, but you absolutely could, to add in a white highlight, or you could use a gouache, like a solid white. Gouache is like a more opaque watercolor. I don't know how to explain that either. But anywho, if you want to learn about gouache, watch Dawn Wilslagle. She has videos on it, and she's fantastic. Or watercolor, like way better. But anywho, this is like the beginner's guide to doing watercolor and to practicing. The other thing, which I thought you would be able to see on the screen, but unfortunately you cannot, I am taking the time when I'm rinsing off my brush and picking up new color. You want to make sure that you are blotting the base of your bristles on a paper towel, because that's going to suck up all of the extra moisture. Your brush should not be dripping wet. And when you take your water to the paper, it should not be bubbled up. You should just see a sheen of it. This one down here, with the pumpkin and the gourd and then the smaller pumpkin, this one is the one that really kind of got away from me. It's sitting on like a little bed of leaves. I did struggle with this one and keeping everything kind of nice and tidy. So just so you know, even when you're somebody who, you know, kind of does this a little bit more often, there are ones that can for sure still get away from you. I wanted this middle pumpkin to read more of like a tannish color. And I think I did achieve that, but it was a struggle for me. So you can use a dry brush to suck up color. So when those little middles of the pumpkin kind of got overwhelmed with the brown, I rinsed the brush, I dried it off, and then I went in to each section and like kind of patted it so that the pigment would be sucked up into the brush, and then, you know, wiped that off, and then went in and sucked up some more pigment, so on and so forth. So you can use your brush as kind of like a little bit of an eraser. And watercolor is really forgiving. So worst case scenario, if you're really like, wow, that's totally blobby, I don't like it at all, you can add water and then blot it up with a clean paper towel so that you can start again. The only problem with that in this style is you might have already lost your lines. So you might need to restamp, or you can do what I do, which is I always keep the stamp set kind of off to the like left-hand side so that I can look at it. So if I have any question about what something is, then I know I can just look there and I can see the lines. So because we're doing repeatedly, you know, the same things over and over again, I didn't show you the entirety of the painting. All of the leaves, the grapes were done the same, you know, as the other grapes, things like that. I wanted to come back and include the tree. So this is one of those ones where kind of like a looser style is really handy to be comfortable with, because you can add in a really light layer and then go in and pick up some darker pigment and kind of add that in. Don't paint it solid. You do want to have those breaks in color, where we're just kind of dabbing it in, because a tree in real life would have those breaks in the, like, coming through the leaves. And then I let it dry for a little bit. I picked up some darker color and then I dropped that in as well. And you can do that as many times as you would like, and that's just going to help create some dimension. I also did spatters. Again, I know that's not for everybody. If you like a super clean look, that's cool. Skip the spatters. I did some pink, some yellow, some orange of the spatters. I kept them really, really small. I'm only using a number 2 round brush. And then here's where I'm going to go in with that metallic. I love gold for fall with like the plummy, you know, rusty oranges. I love the gold with it. So I chose to do a gold accent, and I'm just painting this right over my dry watercolors. If you put them onto wet areas, it will spread out. But just to keep them kind of like contained, I did just wait until they were dry. Here is where I'm trimming it. I told that to you so that I could frame it in. I just wanted to, the gold that I used is from the Altenew metallic set, and it is gold pearl. But anyway, so here, once everything's dry, I'm going to trim it down so that I can have just a little bit of a border. This is, what is this? Plum Punch, I think. Yeah. From Gina K is Plum Punch. And then I wanted the frame to be an actual gold. This is the brushed gold, I believe, from Altenew. And then I cut it again because I wanted the inside for my sentiment. So I cut it again out of white. I'm going to use the frame piece to like kind of put 2 and 2 together so it's a little bit raised. And then I'm going to use the center piece to stamp my sentiment. This felt a little bit too kind of clean on the edges, and I wanted it to have a more kind of vintagey feel. So I just took what was left over on my brush from my brown ink blending and went around the edges. And then for the sentiment, I wanted this Happy Thanksgiving. Normally, I'm not a person who sends Happy Thanksgiving cards, real talk. But since my mom passed this year, I feel like, sending them to her siblings, because we don't get together with our extended family for Thanksgiving. They're in different states. But I feel like just acknowledging the holiday would be something that my mom would want me to do. So I'm going to try. I'm going to try to make sure that I honestly give them to my husband and he gets them in the mail. In the mail. But anyway, this Happy Thanksgiving is long and I wanted it to be stacked because I already knew that I was going to have a lot of open space in the inside of this frame. So I used my little, this is just pixie tape. I marked off, covered up the one I didn't want to stamp, which at first was the Happy and now is the Thanksgiving. Then I can remove the tape. I can stamp down my sentiment, and then put on the gold embossing powder and then heat set that. You do want to make sure that you clean them really well in between, because otherwise if you have some ink that is left on the stamp, you're going to see that on the white paper. So then I wanted to do like a mat inside the frame. So I'm marking the original size of the paper, and then I'm going to trim this white piece to be a little bit smaller. And then that way, when I glue it down, I will know how big I need to trim my piece to match the actual inside of the frame. Alternatively, if you didn't want to do like the two colors or whatever, you could just glue the frame to that different color, like to white, and then you could just cut it out because it's not going to matter. But I wanted there to be a mat inside the frame. You wouldn't realize how hard like matting an actual picture frame is, but back in the day when I used to try to frame, I would pay to frame my cross stitches, which actually was at my parents' house yesterday, and I found so many, like ones that I made for my parents, one that I made for my grandmother. Like, what am I going to do with those cross stitches now? I don't even own any of the cross stitches I've ever made. I've always made them for other people. But anyway, so I had bought like a mat set, which had like a beveled edge for you to cut your own mat board. I was never very good at it. It was very challenging. So I do understand now why we pay to have other people frame our things, because cutting the mat is a learned skill for sure. And I didn't have it. So here I am matting this onto that plum punch, and then I am going to glue, like I said, these two frames together, so that way it is just a little bit thicker and kind of sticks up from the page just a little bit. And then also, because I have two pieces of cardstock glued to each other with the sentiment, this is going to help make that more even. So that everything is kind of flush. And then I'm going to glue down the frame kind of just in the middle top, and then I will be able to put my sentiment into that little frame. I got all excited with adding glue to the inside of the frame before I put down my frame. So I'm not really sure what my thought process was there, but there is our little gold frame. And then we will put our sentiment inside. In order to fill up some of that space, I decided that I was going to add some gemstones. Another way you could do it would be to like add another frame inside. It probably still is a little more open than I would prefer, but that's okay. So you can see those little gold accents along our little watercoloring. It was a lot of good practice for me. So I hope that this inspired you guys to get your watercolors out. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.